TikTok is one of the worst. I try not to necessarily pick out things to pick on, but TikTok especially has those addictive properties built in. And it is true that many of the social media platforms and gaming companies hired psychologists to teach them the addictive processes, and then they built those into their games.
Welcome to the Raising Wild Hearts podcast. I'm so glad you're here listening in as I get to the heart of the matter with the world's leading experts and authors in personal growth, transformation, positive psychology, and more. If you're a change maker, a cycle breaker, a revolutionary envisioning a more beautiful way to live, work, and play, well, me too. I'm your host, Ryan Watkin, and for the past decade, I've been alchemizing challenges to find the calm in the chaos. I believe we can change the world by starting at home in our own minds and hearts. And my hope is that these conversations are a light on your path. Let's go, wild ones. Hello, welcome back to the Raising Wild Hearts podcast. This is Ryan, your host, and I am so happy you're here. Today, I am joined by Mary Catherine Liscinski. Mary Catherine is a licensed professional counselor and certified life coach. She's been a counselor for 13 years, and in 2022, she became certified to treat digital addiction. She has her own private practice coaching clients nationwide, and she loves working with teens, adults, and families, and has a passion for seeing families thrive. So we talk all about tech in this episode and digital addiction and how we are basically just fish swimming in the digital addiction water. And there is a spectrum, which Mary Catherine lays out. There's overuse versus addicted, and we get into some of that in the episode. She talks about some of the signs if you or someone you might know is struggling with digital addiction, what to look for. We also talk about technology and kids. We talk about nature being the antidote for screen burnout, and so much more. And we also talk about judgment, because quite honestly, when I see a super young kid on an iPad or a phone, my first instinct is to really judge that parent. And so Mary Catherine and I talk about coming around to compassion, coming around to support. And that is what really, really makes a difference. Us judging somebody for the choices they're making clearly does not make much of a difference, and nobody wants unsolicited advice. So the way that we're going to change these issues, including tech addiction, that we have in our society is through compassion. It's through support. So that's a really helpful nuance in this conversation, and in so many conversations where our initial instinct is just to judge somebody. So I hope you let this conversation really open your eyes regarding digital screen time and judgment and so many other things we talk about. And friends, drum roll please, the book list is finally ready. I have compiled and curated and categorized 100 plus books of all the guests, the experts, the authors, the parents, the educators, the amazing souls who have been on the podcast. All of their book recommendations are now finally in one spot. So to get your copy, head over to raisingwildhearts.com/books. There are some goodies in there. One of my classics, you hear me talk about it all the time, is The Alchemist. Then, of course, there's Joe Dispenza books, there's The Whole Brain Child, and there are some hidden gems in there, you guys. So head over to raisingwildhearts.com/books and grab your list today. And now, without further ado, let's jump into my interview with Mary Catherine Liscinski.
Please note, the opinions and perspectives of guests on the Raising Wild Hearts podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of Ryan Watkin or anyone associated with the Raising Wild Hearts podcast.
Hi, Mary Catherine. Welcome to the Raising Wild Hearts podcast.
Hi, Ryan. It's so great to be here. Thank you for having me on your show.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you. And so as I was kind of reflecting for this conversation, I noticed this morning on the way to drop my kids off to school, there was a bus stop of what I think is high school kids. And there's a group of, I was trying to count as I was driving by, and there's a group of like 20 plus kids. And out of 20 plus kids, only 2 of the kids were not on their phones. And I thought, well, isn't that, just so timely? And we drive by that bus stop every day. And today I just noticed more because I knew it was on my radar. And it's so, man, it's sad to me because when I look, it's not even that the kids are on their phones and they're also socializing. It's like they all look like little islands of one. They're all just like standing very much alone. They're hunched over. Their body language is super just like hunched, and they just look sad, And I thought, man, that is just terrible. But also, like, I'm in my phone too. And everybody's in their phone too. And I'm, trying to cook dinner and sending one more email or doing this or doing that. And we all kind of have these like habits, and it's so easy to jump on the screen. We depend on them so much. So the place that I really want to kick it off is like, is there a spectrum of technology addiction? And are we all addicted to our technology in some way?
Well, sure. That is a great question. I think there is a spectrum. There is what I would definitely call addiction, and there is actually a diagnostic code for it in the ICD-10, which is what primary care doctors use for diagnosing. But also, there's the spectrum of what I would call overuse, okay? Using it too much. And so, while there aren't specific criteria for that, I think we all fall in the overuse category. But when someone is really addicted, I think some of the signs that you can look for, especially when you're looking at younger people, is withdrawal from others, whether that would be, withdrawing to their bedroom to be alone on their device, on their screen, whether that would be scrolling social media or a video game. But also, like you said, at the bus stop, they were each their own little island. They weren't interacting with each other. And so that's not normal and healthy. And so that withdrawal, definitely anger in young people when they're told to get off their device and do homework, or get off your device and come eat supper. When you have that anger response, that indicates to me too much of an attachment. They can have poor communication skills, like at the bus stop. They're interacting by text. They're not interacting with face-to-face conversations. Less eye contact for sure. And that eye contact gives us the body language feedback. What kind of a mood is this person in? That's so critical to making communication the best that it can be, the way that it's supposed to be. So less eye contact. They're just not as happy as they used to be. Use the word, sad. It makes us sad to see it, but they don't look happy either necessarily. And so also just having fewer interests. Their only interest is, I've got to get back on my screen to see, what are my friends posting now? Or I've got to get back to the video game because it's a continuous game. So fewer interests. And not getting enough sleep. That's huge for all of us. We get stuck on that screen and there's no ending point. Oh, I'm just going to stay up a little bit later, a little bit later, and then it's 2 a.m. before we know it. And so also seeming stressed or depressed with no other apparent reason or cause. It's just, that mood is more down. And I, sadly like to say, we need to realize it's not normal to see these young people walking around with that zombie face. I kind of hate to use that term, but that's the best way to describe it. Even when they're not on their screens, it's just flat and sad. And I'm like, that's not the way children and teens are supposed to be. They're the ones that are supposed to be the most full of life.
Yeah.
And so those are some of the indications that you can look for, especially in younger people, but definitely we as adults can have overuse and addiction as well. So when screen use starts to impact other areas of your life in a negative way, that's, definitely overuse, if not addiction, when it starts negatively impacting other areas.
Yeah. So what's going on when someone feels angry when you have to pull them away from their screen? Like, I notice when our kids watch TV, like if it's like just a little bit too long, once we turn that TV off, I wouldn't say there's like anger per se, but they get like just a little like squirrely. They're just a little like out of sorts, and it takes them a little bit to get kind of reintegrated into real life. So what is what are these screens doing to our brains and our bodies that when we come off of them, we feel like so out of whack?
There's a few different things going on. One would be just the level of stimulation that you get either from watching TV or scrolling social media, and especially video games. That is very stimulating, okay? Whereas being in your house, talking with your siblings or your parents, or doing something, even playing a game or reading a book, that is a definitely lower level of stimulation. And so just like you said, readjusting to the real world, the 3D world, instead of a 2D screen. So that part of it is the level of stimulation. Part of it is the dopamine hit that we are getting from screens. And what's happening there is dopamine is our pleasure chemical, the feel-good, happy hormone, as we like to call it, that gets turned on when we are on a screen or especially playing video games. And so that is the same pathway in the brain that is affected by drugs. And people do not realize that, but it's the same thing. So I'll explain one thing. When you take a drug, there is a dopamine spike, and then it comes back down, and then the person wants another hit of the drug, right, to get that dopamine spike back up. But especially with video games, you have that spike, and then as long as you're playing the video game, it's a plateau. So you're kind of having this continuous feed of a high level of dopamine. And then when all of a sudden you're taken off that screen, you have that crash and you have the meltdowns and the inability to regulate because you're so used to that high level of dopamine that's not provided by other things. And so that is, again, part of the addictive processes that people don't realize. It's the same. It's very similar to drug use, that they're getting that high. And also, dopamine spikes a lot higher in teenagers than it does in adults. So we can be doing the same activity and the teenager will have a lot more dopamine rush. And so that's another reason why they are a lot more prone to any kind of addiction, whether it's substance addiction or a behavioral addiction like this, that they are a lot more prone to it, which is why, we need to be so careful.
Whoa. I had no idea about the teen brain. That makes so much sense, though. Like, developmentally, every single parent should know that. Like, you know what I'm saying? Because then that would really, change some of the choices that we're making as parents when we allow our teens to do or not do certain things. And I think I just put the connection together between like the word dope and drugs and dopamine. I wonder if that's where it came from.
That could be. I do not know, but that would be a good guess, I suppose.
Right? I feel like that makes sense. That tracks. Right. So dopamine is the same chemical. Am I hearing you right? Yeah. That's related to like if we eat a piece of candy or go to a slot machine or take a drug or have a bite of chocolate cake or like see our friend and hug them. Maybe that's oxytocin. I don't know. But it's the same kind of thing. Yeah? Like all throughout.
Yes. And so things like, drugs, cocaine, heroin, things like that, that'll give you a huge spike. Yeah. Something like video games or social media will also give you a big spike. And like I said, it's definitely higher in teenagers. But then when we do things like, play a game with a friend or do other things that are not on screens, that also, or, eat our favorite food, that also provides a dopamine spike, but it's much smaller. Okay. So then also, one of the negative effects is if the teenagers get used to this high level, then the other things that they used to enjoy, they're not going to feel that dopamine anymore. So it's going to feel not enjoyable. So yes, we need dopamine in our lives to have a, healthy, normal life. That's, part of our makeup, but we're meant to have little spikes, little ups and downs that we do feel and enjoy, but not these giant spikes that we're talking about here.
So then they're always chasing kind of like the next high, the next game, the next level. So what I'm hearing you say is then they become like dopamine resistant because then they go play a game of ball outside and it's not there.
Right. It's not there like it used to be. Right.
Wow. Yeah. But we can retrain that? Like,
Sure. Yes. When you get off screens, and you don't have that highest high anymore, and you're more regulated, you start to feel those smaller rises again. Yes, it will readjust. It takes some time, but the same thing, happens with drug addicts. They start to re-enjoy their old life again, but it takes getting down off that. So it's very similar to drug addiction in that way. And I know one thing you mentioned earlier, just developmentally, it's a big deal because also the screens put your mind in your emotional center in the limbic system. I have a little drawing here I'll show you. So this is a drawing of a cross-section of the brain. Hopefully that's in the screen well enough.
Yep.
And so this is your limbic system, the emotional center of your brain. So anger, anxiety, fear, everything like that, this part of the brain lights up, okay? So then this is, right behind your forehead, of course, this is your prefrontal cortex. This part of your brain is responsible for decision-making skills, problem-solving skills, communication, self-control, that, mature brain, emotional intelligence, executive functioning skills, that's all happening up here. But if your young child especially is spending a lot of times on screens and they're spending time on here, the neural connections to develop this part of the brain are not being made. The brain is not fully developed until age 26. And so we're still, that to me says your environment, what you expose your brain to, has a big impact on what develops here. And so developing self-control, problem-solving, communication, we need those neural connections to be forming. And too much time on a screen will block that. And so it's very scary developmentally as well for young children. But again, I say if it's bad for young children, it's bad for us too. Neuroscientists are saying more and more how the adult brain is plastic and can change either to a negative or to a positive. And so I think it will come out more and more that adult brains are a little bit the same way. But if the initial connections don't get formed, that's bad news.
Bad news. So we're letting our kids drive and drink alcohol and vote and go to college on their own until before their brains are fully developed, which I always find to be absolutely ridiculous. If our brains don't develop till our mid-20s, I think that we as society, our timeline is a bit off. I don't know how it could be adjusted, but extending childhood for one. And
right,
it's so,
right.
Yeah.
I think children need to be children. And my phrase is age is just a number. Some are pretty mature at age 18 and some have a long way to go. And so I think that's where parental wisdom is saying, hey, you're not ready to drive yet, or you're not ready to have a screen. You're not ready for social media. I read an article last year in Politico magazine. They surveyed 1,400 mental health professionals like myself. And they said, what's the number one cause of this huge spike in children with depression and anxiety? What's the reason behind it? And the number one reason given by far was social media. Wow. And so here we have, the professionals who are seeing these children who are having so much trouble, and they're identifying social media as the number one cause. And so the more you can delay letting your child on social media, letting your child have access to the internet just all the time, I think is really critical for their health overall, everything.
Yeah, I think so too. I was having a conversation with someone earlier and we were talking about how, there is some sort of commitment to a more challenging path that parenting requires. It requires that you think about the decisions you make, from the medical to the nutrition to the education to everything, because when we just go along with what's going on outside and in society and is culturally normal, that's when I think we fall into these traps a lot of times. I think right now the standard age, from what I'm hearing, I have a fourth grader and we don't do technology yet. They watch TV. She watches TV. My other kids watch TV, but we don't do a phone. The phone's not even on the table yet. It's not even a real conversation yet. It's
Good
not.
for you.
Yes. So, and we're also in an alternative education school, and so there's a lot of parents who are in the same boat. That's helpful. having a community around you that
Yes.
has the same value as you.
Yes.
But other parents are telling me that their kids are asking, like, now's the time. Like, everybody's getting phones, Mom. When is it my go round? And so there, we have to have some sort of firm feet in the sand to say, hey, I know that all your friends want this, and you're not all your friends, and I'm your mom, or I'm your dad, and I know what's best, and we're going to choose this because of this and this. So what would you say to a parent out there right now who's getting pressure from their third, fourth, fifth grader to get a phone and do all the things that it's capable of?
Yeah, there's several things I think could be helpful. One is just to make sure parents know that there are phones out there being designed for teenagers now that do not have internet access and social media and all of these apps. And so if you want your younger child to have a phone for safety purposes, to be able to call you when they're at a friend's house, those phones are available. For sure, there's several different companies that make them. I also say, like you mentioned, if there's any way to connect with another family or two or three who's are going to have nearly similar rules to yours as far as screen usage, that can be super, super helpful. So working hard at that, like you said, parenting is hard. We wish it was easy, but it's not. And so doing that work to try to find somehow another family or two is great. And then also, I think that for young children and for teenagers both, helping to educate them about brain health, using something like this and teaching them, getting them to have a love for their brain, to say, I want a really sharp brain, a really smart brain to be able to do whatever I want to do in life. And so saying, we want to protect that brain so it can grow to the best it can be, getting them excited about brain health, I think is a way to frame it in a positive way rather than we're going to take away your fun, which is what they think. And it is hard, but I think those are some ways to approach it that can help.
Cool. I love that. And I would add too, just for us, like this focus on connection, because when we're not on our phones, when we're not on devices at dinner or, out wherever we're going on a family trip or whatever, when we're not on those devices, we're with each other, making memories, chatting, talking, right? And that's just like those simple connecting memories that we have day to day,
Right. That is huge, not only for their, learning communication skills, learning emotional intelligence skills, learning how to handle when things go wrong.
Yeah.
And that's, parents teach children those skills, but it's partly observation and partly direct teaching. But that is so important for their health as an adult. And we need to remember that the time spent is so huge. And that's how families pass down their values. Unfortunately, I think we're seeing just moral values going down the tubes, whatever people's beliefs are or whatever. It's like we want a society where people are treated well and know how to control themselves in public and things like that. And those have to be taught. Those skills need to be taught. And those skills, they're up here in this part of the brain that is slowly developing, but parents help that along. And so passing down your values to your kids is just really important.
Yeah, I love that. I love that this conversation came to values because it's so true. It's something I really, really need to keep at the forefront, at the prefrontal cortex of my brain, because it's, it affects everything we do in our day to day, and it affects the longevity. It affects our long-term relationships. The number one predictor of success and really happiness later on in life is the quality of your relationships. And so if that's the number one predictor, like, our full-time jobs as parents are to be connected to our kids. And that doesn't mean being permissive or being a friend or, just allowing them to do what they want. It means like having healthy communication skills, being able to navigate conflict, these things that become very human. And I think what's going on, you tell me what you see, Mary Catherine, like many of us, and I know myself is included in this, like we didn't really get that prefrontal cortex online quite the way it needed to be. We didn't learn our emotional regulation like at the time that we needed to learn it. And so many of us are learning this as adults. And so it feels very rocky because it's a little like the blind leading the blind for many of us who are forging this path of doing it a different way and listening to our kids and being authoritative, not authoritarian, right? So what would you say to a parent who feels like they're kind of bumbling their way through this whole thing and just still really like reparenting themselves and like learning themselves how to do it?
Well, there definitely is help out there, either from a professional counselor or from a life coach who can say, here are these skills, and you practice them as an adult, and then you can pass them down to your kids easier. But you can, they can definitely be learned. That is the good thing. Easier to learn when you're younger. But like I said earlier, our brains do have that neuroplasticity to grow and to learn and develop and practice. That is definitely there. But I think that, some people don't realize that a coach or a counselor can teach those skills. And so it's out there. And we just need to refocus on it and say, the younger you learn it, the better.
Totally. Love that. Love that. And then the modeling, of course. We're going to model for them when we get really good at it, and when we practice. Let's talk about screen overuse, because I think we all fall into this category, whether it's like because we're ordering from Amazon or because we want to check social media, because we're working on our phones, because we've got emails coming through, all the different reasons. So let's talk about overuse. It's a little bit like we're like fish swimming in the water and we don't really realize it's a problem because everybody's doing it, but it's a little bit of a problem. So how do we address just like not quite full-blown addiction, but really that like pull and draw to have it out and to check it and to be with it and to not put it down for any extended period of time? How do we address that?
I think one thing that you can do at first is just look at your screen time. Most phones and even some computers will tell you this is how many hours you were on the screen last week, and it will even break it down to all your different apps as well. And so looking at that, unfortunately, can kind of shock us into action to say, you know what, I really do overuse this way more than I want to. So
what's like an average?
Okay,
do you know what? Do you know what sorry to interject, but do you know what like an average is? Like, because like if someone looks on there, like what's average or what's absolutely a lot?
So this is talking about teenagers, not adults. I'll get to adults in a minute, but teenagers, and this would include all screens. This would be phone, television, iPad, all of those together, are spending 7 or 8 hours a day outside of school. That's like an average.
What?
Yeah. So,
Stop.
I mean, they're just on their phones all the time. Now, some of that would be included in school, I guess, if they have their personal phone in school.
Sure.
But
sure.
It is just wildly, they're spending more time on their screen than they are sleeping.
So while you were talking, I had to pull mine up because I don't check my screen time. I don't. And I was like, this is a good opportunity to check my screen time.
Okay.
And I'm 2 hours and 51 minutes average a day.
Okay.
And that doesn't seem bonkers to me. That seems like, that's like, I guess it's a lot, but it doesn't seem out of the range of normal. I don't know.
Right. So I wouldn't say there's necessarily like a normal amount for adults. I think it also depends on how much you use your phone for work. A lot of us use it a lot for work, so that's kind of hard to parse out. But I think another way for each person to kind of evaluate, okay, how much time do I actually want to spend on my screen? You can look at, okay, if I am awake for 16 hours a day and then I'm sleeping for 8, let's just say that as a good, positive if we're trying to get 8 hours of sleep a day. So
we are. All
right. That's a goal, right?
Yeah. So
then say, okay, out of 16 hours, how many hours do I want to be on my phone? Or what percent? If I'm on my phone for 3 hours out of 16, what percent of my day is that? And you do a little calculations. You can say, okay, do I want that percent of my day with my face stuck on a screen?
Yeah.
So I think that can help you decide for yourself, I need to cut down here. But I also think for a whole family especially, definitely starting with, no phones at mealtime for sure.
Yep.
And then also having a time of, at this time of night, from this time of night on, no screens. And we're all putting our phones at this docking, charging station. That's another way to say, we're all off the screen at nighttime and we're doing things with each other, or we're reading a book or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I think, some of the screen time apps will also tell you how much time per day on each app. So you can look at your Facebook app, you can look at Pinterest, you can look at TikTok. I think TikTok is one of the worst. I try not to necessarily pick out things to pick on, but TikTok especially has those addictive properties built in. And it is true that many of the social media platforms and gaming companies hired psychologists to teach them the addictive processes, and then they built those into their games. So that's scary and terrible, right?
Yeah.
And so when we know these are designed to keep us on, to keep our face stuck, on there, that's I need to be careful. And I want to think about, again, what % of my day do I want to be on a screen versus doing all of the other things that I want to do with my life?
Totally. And this makes me think of even one step further, okay, if we've got let's say a 13-year-old, 8 hours a day on the screen, many of those hours, let's say on TikTok, what is the content that they're seeing? I mean,
Right.
That to me is the added, terrifying factor here, because it's not like they're, I don't know what they're doing. Maybe you probably know better than I do, but what I'm imagining is not good. It's not values oriented. It's not wholesome. I would venture to say that they come across pornography. I would venture to say that they come across violence. And I would venture to say that it's really, really messing with their brain, the content, let alone the screen.
It is. I don't tend to necessarily focus a lot on content because I think people are more aware of that, or they should be, but it's very true. All kinds of content is on there that you would not want anyone, to have access to, but it's also different worldviews, different way of thinking about things. When you're trying to instill your values to your children, I've known families that were just wonderful families, very family oriented, and all of a sudden their 16, 17-year-old started talking to strangers online through the Discord app. And their teenager did a 180 and it went totally against everything their parents had taught them. And that's a 16-year-old who is a little bit more grounded than a 13-year-old. But if you think, 13-year-olds or 11-year-olds being exposed to all of these things, that is so bad. And I think parents need to think about, okay, you would never let your child go spend the night at a stranger's house. Right. That's just an automatic no. You would never do that. But I think that when you allow your child access to the internet or to apps where they can talk to strangers especially, that is like a virtual sleepover. So in their bedroom, you have no idea who they're talking to, what they're talking about, what kind of situation they're getting into. Unfortunately, sextortion is on the rise. I was just reading an article yesterday talking about how now teenagers can use these AI programs to create pornography of their friends. And it's fake, but it looks so real. And that's just such a big no. And so dangerous.
Yeah.
We need to wake up here, people. That it is just really bad.
Really bad.
That
really
virtual sleepover, that's a good thing to think about.
Yeah.
Who are the strangers in your child's bedroom right now?
Yeah. I love that example. That's a great example. I think we can all resonate with that, and that it gives a visceral reaction of oh, hell no, I'm not going to send my kid to a sleepover at a stranger's. I'm not going to send my kid to a sleepover at somebody I know at this point, let alone a stranger.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's bring it up, Mary Catherine.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things we can do? I know that you talk about spending time in nature, and that feels like a really solid solution. So when we go outside, why do we feel differently? Why does it reverse that kind of pent up feeling that we get when we're on those screens too much?
Yeah. So our bodies pretty naturally and pretty automatically match the environment that we're in. Okay. So in nature, that atmosphere, that level of energy, that vibe, that feel from nature is a calm feeling, barring a tornado or a hurricane, right? It's pretty calm out there. And so then your internal system is going to turn off that fight or flight. And it's going to turn on your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the calm, relaxed state. Okay, so just going outside, but then also, being outside and having an awe about nature. And I think we have unfortunately lost that. But it's like, look at a flower, look at a cool shaped cloud, look at, anything. And it's like, wow, this is really cool. Or this bug crawling on the ground, or hearing the birds sing. Hearing birds singing is good for our mental health, and that's been proven in studies.
Really?
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah. And so having that awe of, the world is bigger than me. The world is not all about me. And also, being outside with friends and family, that makes it even better. But so just that atmosphere outside, your body is going to match that instead of whatever stressed out state that you've been in.
So helpful to put it that way. I think anybody listening who has had a fussy baby or toddler and has taken said fussy baby or toddler outside and the fussy baby or toddler becomes unfussied, I think we all have experienced that at some point. And we didn't know how, I never knew how to explain it or why it worked. I just knew that it worked. So I did it. So that was such a good way of putting it. We kind of co-regulate with nature in a way.
Yes, we do. We do.
That's beautiful. I love that. So are there any other tips or suggestions that we could add into our everyday lives to make it a little simpler to not want to be on the screen or just to even be more mindful?
Right. Well, I think that if you think about, okay, if my teenager has been on a screen, say even, 5 hours a day, and we say, okay, we're going to drastically reduce that, what are they going to do instead, right? And so being outside, would be one thing, but also physical movement is very important for us. We are all way too sedentary, right? And so physical movement for any age is important, but especially also for younger children, that physical movement is, again, part of what helps the brain to develop and to be able to have literacy. Okay, so physical movement is part of the building blocks for literacy skills. So, but yes, physical movement, we need to get up off the couch, right? And also, like you said, mindfulness, being in the present moment is, taking ourselves away from the future and the past. It is also going to, I think, help build our emotional intelligence, just knowing what's going on with me. How am I feeling? What are my 5 senses taking in? That, again, is going to build our ability to have self-control and emotional self-control, to know what's going on with me rather than just responding to external stimuli all the time. Being able to know, okay, and to be mindful and using our 5 senses is, I think, a skill that used to be just part of normal, natural life that now we're too busy and we don't do it anymore, but to be able to slow down. And so I think if you do try to slow down and you feel a little crazy trying to sit there, that's another, to me, indication that there's something that's off. We need to be able to do that very easily. Yeah. So if you feel anxious when you try to just be with yourself, that's a sign. And I think that also getting appropriate sleep, when we take away screen time, it's going to be a lot easier to go to bed. And sleep is so critical for emotional regulation and for learning and for our work, for us as adults. Sleep is critical. And when we spend too much time in front of a screen with all that blue light, the blue light from the screen blocks our melatonin from turning on and helping us to sleep and to sleep deeply at night. So the blue light from the screens is really damaging us no matter what the content is.
Yeah. So I heard you say something about literacy and physical movement, that the two are correlated. Mm-hmm. And that is such a big deal because we parents of school-aged kids and these little toddlers that turn 5 and 6, and we really want them to read because, reading is the thing, and, we need them to be on par. But if they're sitting, for 8 hours a day, or if they're on a screen, or if they're learning through technology, I think that it's probably much harder, and it could be one of the reasons that we're seeing so many, challenges academically, and resistance to want to read, and resistance to, sitting down and doing the work, because the work is quite boring. So my point is that kids need to move, and that's what helps them learn, right?
Yes, it does. We need that physical movement to make those brain connections. And one other interesting thing is that so many of the CEOs of technology companies out in Silicon Valley, they send their kids to schools that do not allow screens. So they don't have their cell phone, they don't work on computers.
Yep.
And so many of those families also, they don't have screens at home either. They don't allow their kids on social media. And so if the creators of these products say, my kids aren't going to, be involved with that, then what does that say to us as well? And that, hey, maybe it's not healthy for our kids either. If they recognized it's not healthy, maybe I need to as well. One of the first books that I read about digital addiction I was surprised to learn, actually written by an occupational therapist. And she was starting to get all of these referrals from schools that she had not seen these problems before. And she started making the connection with screen time and saying, these kids are developmentally behind, and it's because they're sitting looking at a screen all day.
Yep.
So we need to think about that. And here's where I get tripped up, because Mary Catherine, we've made certain decisions for our family that have gone against the grain. We've been swimming upstream, and we're okay with it. Like, we're fine being like the different ones at this point. And, we've found that we can find our community. But sometimes when I'm in Target, or we're at a restaurant, or we're here or there or everywhere, I see these really, 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 really young kids, and all kids really, but with their faces in these giant tablets or on mom's phone. And I get it, being a busy and, being a human, being a busy person, a parent nonetheless, and having all these things to juggle. Like, I understand why people go to that, length. I understand they need quiet, they need to run their errands, they need to do this, they want to keep the kid happy. But I have this little twinge of judgment that comes up when I see these kids, and I feel so sad for the kid, and I feel a little judgmental towards the parents. So, and I want to get past that judgment. I want to move it to compassion. Ultimately, I really want to have compassion for everybody, but still, I want to change it. I want to change it. Like, I want these parents to wake up and to go, okay, we can do it a different way. So how do we marry this judgment with the compassion, and then also changing the trajectory of society where the no screen policy is the mainstream? Hey, it's me, Ryan. So something I do every single day to invest in my growth, besides connecting with the humans on this podcast, obviously, is reading. Reading is where it all started for me. I was 5 when I became obsessed with books, writing them, reading them, collecting them. I love how I can get inspired with new ideas and stories and ways to grow. That's why I ask all my guests what they're reading. And finally, you can check out all the book recommendations from the experts and authors on the show in one place at raisingwildhearts.com/books. There are some life changers in there, like You Are the Placebo, and a few hidden gems like Sacred Motherhood and Living, Loving, and Learning. So if you want to get your hands on your next great read, check out the full list by heading to raisingwildhearts.com/books. Okay, back to the show. Right. I think it definitely starts with us, but you're right. We can have that first, snap judgment of, ooh, they shouldn't allow their children on a screen so young. I think if we do tap into that sadness, that can get us away from the judgment. I think that's kind of my best advice about that. But then, like you said, any little ways that we can spread the message. And that's why I love being on podcasts, for people to be able to learn and educate. And there is a balance between, like, I feel this urgency because I am so familiar with all of the dangers. There's so many different types of dangers. I can get really worked up. But then to say, you know what? I need to have compassion and love, and we need support. And that's, one of the hardest things to get sometimes, is to say, let's find at least one other family that can do something very similar along with us, having that support. And I hope to provide a little bit of that support as a coach, because I've heard so many parents say, we tried to limit screen time in our home and we gave up. We failed. We couldn't do it. And so I'm like, no, you can do it. Let me help you as a coach. Let's get you a support system somehow and provide that support. And I think just any way you can spread the message, any way you can talk about, your kids enjoying life off screen and just spreading that more and more, is the way that we can do it. And just as many voices as we can out there, that's slowly how it happens.
Yeah, I love that. I love that theme of support, the theme of compassion. It's all I can do to not run up to the mom and say, did you know this? And did you know that? And nobody wants unsolicited advice.
No,
I
right,
don't.
no.
They don't. They're just trying to get through their grocery list here.
Right.
But I think that these compassionate, non-judgmental conversations can help. And I think people will get curious. I just hope that parents start to say, I'm kind of curious, what other families are doing, and even modeling it out in public, modeling our kids, coloring on a coloring book. And it's not pretty, not the actual coloring, no pun intended. Sometimes, things get messy and people we're arguing, or a sibling is, hitting another sibling or whatever it is. And that's the real life. And that's where we can model with grace and not as much judgment against ourselves, because we can be oh God, everybody's looking at us. Oh God, what are they going to think? Our kids are misbehaving. That's what kids do.
Right.
Kids aren't behaving perfect behavioral machines. That's not what they are. They're kids. They're little humans learning about their world. So yes, this is a great conversation to spread the word, to get the message out there, and to just, normalize it and not have a stigma be around it. The guilt and the shame certainly doesn't help, I'm sure.
Right. Yeah. But just to model ourselves and to say things with friends, who you can influence in a nice way without being unsolicited.
Yeah.
I think any little ways that we can spread the message and to normalize what, normal childhood is great.
Totally. So where can we find you and follow you and learn more about the work that you're doing in the world, Mary Catherine?
Sure. Well, anyone can just call me up. My phone number is 501-290-7132. So you can call me, or you can go to my website, which is lifewalkcoaching.com. So it's WALK. So lifewalkcoaching.com. Those are the ways you can find me. So there was one lady I was telling about, I'm now a digital addiction coach, and she was like, oh, do you make TikTok videos? And I was like, no, I'm not on TikTok. It's a little bit ironic there, but so I do not post everything on every social platform because I'm not not there.
And you've got a phone number. We can call you and talk to you. Yes. How revolutionary is that? I love it. It's great. I like that. Kind of getting back to the old school. We have a landline in our house. So people just think we are dinosaurs, but it's for It's for the kids because then they can call their friends. And I'm trying to get all their friends to get landlines too, because, they're like calling back and forth the parents' cell phones. I'm like, let's bring the landline back, everybody.
Right.
That way our kids can just call each other and chat, like the olden days.
That's
okay.
great.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to ask you now the 3 questions I ask everybody at the end of the interview. And the first one is, what's bringing you joy today?
I think just the fact that it is turning into springtime is bringing me a lot of joy. I'm here in Arkansas, and we are starting to have some good warm weather. We're still having cool evenings, cool nights, but I'm hearing more bird singing. I'm looking at all the different flowers that are in the field across from my house and feeling that warm sun. That is bringing me joy.
Beautiful. And what, if anything, are you reading?
I am now reading a book called Irresistible by Adam Alter. So it is about all this digital addiction topic. And so it's not very fun to read. It's pretty depressing, unfortunately. But that is what I'm reading. So he goes a lot into the addictive properties and how these, games and social media platforms were designed, and how it's gaming especially is kind of morphing into gambling, with these games having the option to, pay this and you get to open this, treasure box to see what's in there. Well, that's a gamble. Is it going to be something useful, or is it going to be a clump of dirt? So they're putting that gambling aspect to make it even worse. And so anyway, that is what I'm reading right now, Irresistible by Adam Alter.
Okay. We're going to add it to the list, everybody. That sounds like an important read for sure. Actually, I think about like these little kid casinos that we let our kids go into called arcades.
Right.
And like every time, we don't go to arcades, but we've been, and we're on the periphery, and there have been times where we have partaken in the arcade madness. And I'm like, this is gambling, it feels like it. And so I think when we can even just question everything, like not in a too crazy of a way, but in questioning like, is this good for our family? Is it not? Does it feel good? Is everybody in a good mood after? Did this really like mess with the kids' kind of like, moods? Like, do the kids leave cranky? Anytime that our kids are like having a giant meltdown, like after the TV, after the too much ice cream, whatever it is, it's like, well, okay, maybe that's not the greatest decision. And that's one of those things for me that's like, well, that's probably not a good thing to get in the habit of doing. So yes, that is very helpful. Irresistible. We'll put it on the list. Okay. And then the last question I have for you is, who or what has taught you the most?
For that, there would be so many people I could name, but I'm going to name my grandmother. Margaret is my mother's mother. She really knew how to make life about people, and she knew how to smell the roses, like literally, but also figuratively. But she knew how to appreciate the little things and to just enjoy life. She also would have this phrase of, she wanted to have a good deed for the day. And so whether that was a good deed towards a person or whatever, she just made life about people. And I really admired that about her and want to be more like that in my own life. And so I learned so much about just living life in a healthy way from her. So
beautiful. Thank you so much for being here. This was a great conversation.
Thank you, Ryan. It was just a pleasure to be able to share with you and share with your listeners. I love helping people.